Today, to get to the ancient hill town of Rye from the sea, you need to travel up the almost canal-like mouth of the River Rother. The silting up effects of the currents and tides of the English Channel hereabouts have always been enormous. The coastline here has changed dramatically over the centuries, and that is why Rye is now 2 miles from the sea. In order to keep the river mouth open for navigation and flood control, it has to be dredged day in and day out, and the offending shingle is endlessly carted 5 miles west, back to where it came from. Rye used to be almost an island surrounded on 3 sides by the sea, but since Roman times, different parts of Romney Marsh have been reclaimed so that over 100 square miles are below sea level. The port is now on guard against invasion by the sea itself. I have been interested in this place since filming the Map and Lucia television series. The original stories are set here, although the town is called Tilling in the books, and they were written by one of Rye's most famous past residents. He was a mayor like my character Lucia, and so was my guide for this real-life look at Rye. Roger Breeds is a born and bred Ryer who has been mayor and is still a local councillor. This is a tale of several mayors.
You can actually see the town actually better from the river.
Fascinating, yes. I mean, certainly didn't do that before when I was here.
No.
Take a nice trip up the river.
It's an opportunity you've got to take every chance you get. Go out on the river, see the town from the river.
Well, it's delightful, isn't it?
It is a very straight channel, as you can see, and it has to be kept clear at all times because it does form a major part of the drainage system for the whole of Romney Marsh. And all the land beyond there forms part of the Rye Harbour Nature Reserve. It's a vast area. It's all reclaimed from the sea, mostly bird life, but there's a lot of insects. They've got quite a catalogue of insects that they've discovered. They get specialists in at different times who sort of find another beetle that we never knew we had. And there's a lot of stuff out there.
The first human inhabitants we find coming in from the sea are in Rye Harbour, a small village only 1.5 miles from the town of Rye itself, but apparently rather independent.
Rye Harbour Village is a community on its own and has been for many years. They sort of tend to sort of lead a life all of their own, really.
It's very sort of territorial. Rye Harbour, a different parish. Although I'm not as bad as some of them were in the old days, you know. That I do speak to the people in Rye.
Rye Harbour Village is where the local lifeboat is stationed. What with the distance from the sea and the big tidal ranges, they can have a problem or two.
I think we might be a little bit unusual in this neck of the woods that we're about 1 mile from the sea. A low water launch for us is about 10 to 14 minutes. Whereas if the tide is in the harbour, we're about 4.5 minutes we average.
If the tide is out, the boat can't be launched down the slipway. It has to be pushed out by a tractor and then reconnected to it so that it can be pulled all the way to the beach.
There's 15 in the crew. They're all on call. They all carry pagers. Everybody who can run for the shout runs. It's the first 4 here and the crew for the boat on that occasion.
The lifeboat shares a special private road to the shore with the shingle lorries.
Through the summer it can get called out as much as 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes it can do 3 shouts on the same day. If we've got the wind off the land and a nice sunny day, we know that we're going to have inflatables blown to sea. The crew train regularly once a week. The boat goes afloat to do something, just to get it wet. The chaps that do it are the blokes that would like to think somebody would do it for them if they're in trouble. It is the thrill of doing it. Why do people climb mountains? When you live here and you're born here, it's part of it.
The black balls, hoisted on the harbour master's mast, told us that we couldn't continue on to Rye itself until the port's largest regular visitor had passed. This is a sea dredger, which collects aggregates from the coast off nearby Hastings for a gravel works near Rye Harbour. The works are not as busy as they have been, and neither is the wharf itself.
This is the main wharf of Rye Harbour. Unfortunately for the last year we haven't been able to use it because the company went into liquidation, so therefore we've sort of lost a lot of useful wharfage space in the river. We're hoping that the future being what it is, that somebody will take it over and we can reopen the wharf and really get the cargo traffic going again, because we've theoretically lost about £90,000 of cargo dues on this wharf, and it will have an effect obviously. One time it used to be about half a dozen boats moored up here, and over the years it's increased. You can see there's boats from all over the territory just looking at the numbers. The RX is the Rye number, of course.
375 and 370 the fish, 65 and 360 for the fish, 355 and 350, 45 and 340, just that one fish, 340, 790, 87 pounds, 70 and 60, 50 and 750. Bottle.
Well, you have your fish market, the actual wharfage here. We have a fish processing plant a little bit further downstream.
Obviously it's a substantial facility in terms of manpower. It must provide work for in excess of 100 people, a catch of certainly in excess of £1 million. Probably 1.5, I would imagine. We're now highly geared to export, really. Something like 75% of our product would go abroad, either to France, Belgium, Holland. They're still by far the bigger consumer of fish compared to the UK. The UK is, let's face it, is cod. This is the biggest fish it uses, whereas the other countries still look to eat far more of the other species. So basically it's a case of we can command a better price abroad than in England.
This looks like the sort of place where you'd expect to find marinas.
Well, there have been several proposals over the last few years, but nothing so far has developed, because mainly the problem being the developers want to build a housing estate surrounding it, and this is one of the main objections in this area.
You're very strict about housing development.
Oh yes, well in this particular area we've got a nature reserve on most of the land either side, which sort of restricts development of any sort.
Yes.
But as I say, marinas would be okay, but it's the houses that go with it.
The houses that go with it.
Yes.
I see.
Well, this is a waterside development which was granted permission about 12 years ago, and anything sort of associated with the river was seen to be acceptable. One half of the building was actually designed as a boatel, the intention being that visiting yachtsmen could tie up there and spend a night in the boatel units. This patently didn't happen, so eventually the houses were beginning to sell off as private units, so we had to alter the planning consent so they could actually sell them. I think on reflection, a development such as this would never happen again.
Finally, we arrived at the old quay itself, which is dominated by very distinctive tall, dark buildings. And are these warehouses here?
Well, they were used obviously for storage of cargo coming into the quay at those days.
Yes.
They were actually falling into a state of disrepair, so various planning applications came in, and we decided rather than let them fall into disrepair, to allow them to be converted into sort of small apartments and little businesses on the ground floor, which has actually saved the actual buildings from falling apart. Yes.
Planning regulations are very strict in Rye in order to preserve the heritage, which is its main stock in trade. All new buildings in the quay area, for example, have to be in keeping with the big old warehouses, which date from the 18th century, whatever their function. Even the local supermarket is shrouded in black timbers. In medieval times, Rye was a walled city, walled against the French, and could be entered only by one of 3 gates. This is Landgate, the only remaining one. It was built in about 1340, and the grooves for the portcullis can still be seen. No one seems to know why the arches of the gate are so strikingly different. At the top of the town is the 12th century parish church, which boasts the oldest clock in the country with original working parts. The clock is an 18th century addition and, unusually, strikes only the quarter hours. The churchyard was the scene of Rye's most famous murder in 1743. A local butcher, John Breeds, was incensed at being fined for giving short weight by James Lamb, Chief Magistrate and Mayor. Knowing that Lamb was to attend a dinner and would return home via the churchyard, Breeds lay in wait and, it was alleged, fatally stabbed the wearer of the mayoral cloak. According to some accounts, he proceeded to run about the town crying, "Butchers should kill lambs." The murder victim was in fact the indisposed mayor's brother-in-law who had attended the dinner in the borrowed cloak. There was no mistake about Breed's fate, however. He was hanged and his body was chained to a gibbet and displayed as an awful warning on what is still known as Gibbet's Marsh just outside the town. Anyone finding the yarn far-fetched can visit the nearby town hall. The story gets even grimmer. Over time, Breed's bones were pulled from the cage, boiled by a group of old women, and the resulting infusion was drunk as a cure for rheumatism. Part of the skull remains, still in its grisly cage. So tell me, what is your family's involvement in this gruesome story?
Well, I suppose the family is actually recorded back in history to sort of 1462. We've got a family tree which actually goes back 17 generations to that date.
Gracious.
Coming back to this particular character who now hanging around the town hall.
Just seen his skull.
Well, yes, the association there is a little bit vague, although it's the same name. On this family tree there is a line that goes down one side which aims towards John Breed's the murderer, you see.
Why isn't it buried? That's what I was to ask you.
Well, there was some talk a while ago, question I posed to them, well, since when do you bury the remains of a convicted murderer in sort of consecrated grounds? Surely that is not allowed. But I said, if you really want to be able to bury him, then you've got to make sure he was actually innocent at the time. I always thought it was rather strange that the actual intended victim was actually the trial magistrate, which in today's law courts would not be allowed. So therefore I think under that sort of system, yes, it was wrong. But I also believe, you know, if you read all the various histories, he was probably framed.
This is the house to which Butcher Breeds thought his ill-fated victim was returning. Lamb House has other claims to fame as well. E.F. Benson, author of the Map and Lucia books, lived here, and he was mayor himself for 4 years in the 30s. This house is the Mallard's of the books. The garden has a reputation in its own right. Benson lauded it in the books, and it is the resting place for 3 of his beloved dogs. The house is now owned by the National Trust, and outside Rye is best known as the home of American-born novelist Henry James for some 16 years. He did not become mayor, but he buried a dog in the garden too. Not all Ryers approve of the ownership arrangement. Some think that the house is of such importance in the history of the town that it should be under local jurisdiction.
Wicked old Jake himself here, scheming and plotting, talking. And then he tells them all to batten down, and they batten down like that.
The literary tradition lives on in Rye. A contemporary local artist has had some fun with its seafaring history involving the relocation of a very famous sailor.
He doesn't come from here, but when we first came to live here, which was about 7 years ago, it seemed a very obvious place to bring him. We, in fact, had been associated with Rye for a very long time because my wife's family had lived here on and off for 2 or 3 generations. This fictional town in that little book is totally based on Rye. I changed all the names. I called Rye Cinqueport, I called Mermaid Street, Barmaid Street, and so on. But I think anyone who had ever been to Rye would recognise almost every page.
He got dragged down with me all the time, and he grew to love it too. And we're so lucky, we're so happy in Rye. It's such a lovely place. It's so interesting, and when you've got people staying, there's no trouble about entertaining them. You just take them round Rye, show them Rye, and all the historic associations and so on. It's so lovely.
The captain himself, Captain Pugwash, was in fact created for Eagle magazine, which some of your older viewers may remember. And very soon afterwards, I produced this little book, about 1954, something like that, because I knew I had something good there. And this little book, this particular one, it was just a sketchbook, and I just drew pictures in it and made up the story, was in fact turned down by 12 publishers, which is routine, I think, and finally taken by the Bodley Head on my 13th attempt. So that's how he started.
These little medieval streets, unfortunately now, the most unsuitable great lorries and things try and come through it. But they can't, luckily, they can't get through the land gate, so they can't be too big.
Nothing seems to threaten the historic heart of Rye, but unwelcome progress is menacing its edge. The major new road from Devon to Dover is going to cut across this one, and all for the sake of a beetle.
We were flabbergasted. We moved to this particular house about 6 years ago, and we thought it was fairly safe because we've got the river out the back and the main road out the front. And we were astounded when the Department of Transport actually contacted us to say that they're going to knock 6 houses down. And the road is going to come straight through our house, straight through the gardens, straight through over the river. Main reason is there's a special breed of water beetle that lives in the dikes over the back of us. And also, 3 years ago, they made the area into a European bird zone. They wanted to put the road to the middle of the Rye. About 4 years ago, they come up with the route, and there was so much objection by Rye people saying it was going to bisect Rye in half that they shelved that, and now they've come up with this one. If this was a complete row of houses right up to Winchelsea and they had to come through this block of 6, we would accept it. But because there's an alternative route half a mile away, which won't affect any houses, just this water beetle, I think people should look again.
I'm quite fond of water beetles if I ever trip over one, but I should have thought they could have moved the water beetles rather than knock down somebody's house, frankly.
This is your first visit back to Rye since you filmed the Mapanuccia series?
Yes, it is. It's lovely being back here. But it was really strange for me because, it's 10 years since we made it. And coming back in my own identity instead of being Lucia.
Yes.
Because we were here for quite a long time, as you remember, and really, I think, disrupted the whole place. But I was here in character, playing Lucia and going around in my Rolls Royce and really feeling that I was Queen of Rye.
George, a dream. Oh, I wish I'd brought my sketchy tools.
And one day there were a group of very Tillingite-looking people on the other side of the road, and the director called out action, and we were just starting to play the scene, and a voice called out from the other side of the road, "Miss McEwan, I hope you get it right." Which I thought was hilarious. I mean, a real character from the Map and Lucia series, really.
The church tower.
Benson always had a terrific tongue in his cheek, you know, and nobody minds being taken off a little bit. And anyhow, of course, nobody believes that it's them. It's always somebody else, you see. That's really what it is.
He was wickedly humorous about it, of course.
Yes.
But they were a terrible lot of people in a way, weren't they? The characters in Map and Lucia.
Yes.
I mean, their values were awful, and they were totally only interested in themselves.
Oh, yes. No, I watched it with great interest because I could see the funny side of it, you know, because Tilling still lives as far as I'm concerned. But,
Does it?
Oh, yes, very much so. Yes.
I felt it probably did.
Yes.
You have to accept that you're living in a time warp of about 30 years behind the times when you live in Rye. But it's got its advantages, the countryside. The beach is only 4 miles down the road. So you have to weigh these things up.
Not surprisingly, Rye is a major tourist attraction. In the season, there are almost as many beds available for the night as there are permanent residents here.
We get very overrun, of course. I mean, any beautiful town nowadays, and it's very important to us, of course. The tourism is frightfully important to Rye. I must say, it does sometimes get a bit thick.
But Rye doesn't quite get trampled to death. It is very careful to discourage inappropriate behaviour by its visitors.
I think, again, it comes back to the fact that it is so small, and the shops are small, and you've got masses of children coming in dripping ice cream, you know, and covering everything with stick. You've got to keep some control over it, quite honestly.
This is not a seaside town, of course, hasn't been since the reclamation of the marshes, so there's not too much of that sort of trade. The charming hotels, bed and breakfasts, pubs and restaurants cater for holidaymakers who stay but often leave the town during the day. Through good luck or careful marketing, it is often used as a place from which to visit other places of interest in the area. It is carefully, lovingly, even jealously preserved,